Here's a question. Should esports teams be location-based? Recently, with the advent of plenty of franchised leagues all over the world for multiple different esports, a few of them have tried to set up their leagues similar to what you might see with traditional sports. In traditional sports, obviously, virtually every league in the world has teams that are located in various cities to represent various regions, Manchester United, Green Bay Packers, New England Patriots, so on and so forth. And this is something that a few esports teams have been trying to do, a few esports leagues, as it's a little bit unusual for an esports league to do this. Most of the time when you see an esports league like the LCS or any of the League of Legends leagues, you just see teams they're just teams. They're teams that are located wherever the league takes place in, wherever they play. But there isn't really any sort of city affiliation with CLG or TSM or anything like that. They're just they represent the region of North America. They don't represent specific cities. But as we've seen in the Overwatch League, that is probably the most successful franchised league that currently has location-based teams. More notably, I think one of the things that's interesting is the new Call of Duty franchised World League, I believe, is also doing franchising with location-based teams. And it's a little bit interesting to wonder, is that a good idea? That's what we're going to be talking about today. And I want to be as respectful as possible. I want to be as respectful as possible. But this is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. There's a number of reasons why this is a bad idea and why this is not something that we should strive for. And I'm going to try and get through all of it without getting all these little points jumbled. But in theory, let's first start off by saying this. If we were living in a world where esports are more popular than traditional sports, where they are the premier sporting event that every average individual wants to go and be entertained by, then I would love it if there was the Cincinnati Counter Logic Gamers and they played against the New York Team Solo Mids, right? That would be a really cool thing, because one of the things about traditional sports that is cool is a sense of hometown pride. But not only do we not live in a world where esports is bigger than traditional sports, but we're never going to get to a world where esports is bigger than traditional sports through going this route. The only way that having city-based or location-based teams is ever going to work is if esports is already bigger than traditional sports, and you will never grow esports by having traditional sports or by having this same sort of structure as traditional sports. It's kind of like Mario or Link or something, right? You can see this across virtually every industry in the world, but anytime you see someone that does something first, they get to make all sorts of mistakes. Mario and Link and The Legend of Zelda, not to rag on Nintendo too much, but those are not perfect games. There have been plenty of horrible Mario games out there. There have been plenty of horrible Zeldas. There have been plenty of games out there that have done a much better job at storytelling, that have had much more exciting gameplay, that have had much just better and more interesting premises overall. But if you're first, you get to have a spot in people's minds that is very difficult to take away. If you are the first successful thing in any sort of industry, then you get to have like a permanent spot as being the original in a consumer's mind. And so people, you're never going to have esports take over traditional sports, maybe ever, but you're never going to be able to mimic what traditional sports are doing and use that as a jumping off point to try and overtake traditional sports. And you have to overtake traditional sports to have this sort of system work. You can't even just be equal in popularity. You have to be vastly more popular and more successful to be able to take over this ground that traditional sports have held for 150, 200 years. And again, there's a number of different points where we're going to try and get through all of them here without getting too jumbled. But let's start off by talking about this, right? Again, as much as I would love it if this was the world we live in, it's not. And you have to ask, when you're trying to say, okay, let's have a franchised esports league that's location-based with all the teams, you have to ask, what are our goals with doing that? Why are we doing that? What is our attempt? What is it that we're trying to achieve by placing teams in cities? Is it to expand our audience? Is it to expand our audience beyond just people who would watch the esport anyway, expand our audience to people that might feel a little bit more interested in checking it out because they live in a city that has an esports team? If that's your goal, that's not going to work for a number of reasons we'll get into in a moment. The other goal that you could maybe have is, are you trying to have people that live in that city who do watch esports or who are fans of a team or whatever? Are you trying to give those fans a little bit more enthusiasm? Are you trying to make those fans a little bit more excited, maybe more likely to purchase gear or something because they feel a little more connection to a team because that team represents the place that they live? That's a little bit more reasonable of a goal, but that's actually something that I also think is going to have an ultimate net negative. And another thing that people don't really consider when they think about this kind of idea is it's not a profitable thing to run a team from a city. This is one of the least profitable aspects of traditional sports. And in traditional sports, the reason that teams are location-based is because it's a necessity, because you have to have a place to play. In traditional sports, you have to physically play on a 100-yard football field, on a however many square feet or square meters or whatever an association football or soccer field is. Soccer pitch, excuse me. Whatever the sport is, a hockey rink, a baseball diamond, you have to have a physical place to play. And that's the reason why teams are location-based in sports. There is no other reason, because those are the least profitable elements of a traditional sport, is the big stadium you have to build, having to fill it with fans consistently. Like that's something that, again, we will get into a little bit. But let's start digging in to every one of these little bits of why this is not really a good idea and why it's likely not going to work. Okay. So let's theorize that you and I want to start a competitive Pong esport, right? And we want to have a sports league, an esports league, where we have competitive Pong teams that are location-based in a number of different cities. Now, the first question you have to ask yourself is, how do you choose the cities the teams are going to be based in? Namely, there are two options for yourself. You can have a large market or you can have a small market that you choose to enter. Now, the difference is a large market would be the New York City, Los Angeles, Boston, London, Paris, Seoul, Korea. These are the huge cities that you're obviously going to try and have a team there because you want to capture the largest demographic possible. If you're putting a team in the cities that are the most populous cities in the world, that's more people that could potentially choose to watch your esport. That's more people that could potentially choose to watch and get involved and try and become fans of a team because there's more people in that city. Now, again, you have to go back to your goals. And if your goal is to penetrate a market and try and say, I'm going to put an Overwatch team in New York, and I'm doing that because I want to have more people getting into Overwatch who might not already be a fan of Overwatch. And if you're trying to expand your reach and expand the growth of the esport and get it a little bit more popular and successful by doing so and trying to hit the large markets for the sake of doing that, that's not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is because nobody's going to care if you're putting a team in a large city. This is something that currently the NFL is struggling with. The NFL has had a number of teams that have been based in Los Angeles over the years, and more recently there have been two teams, the formerly St. Louis Rams and the formerly San Diego Chargers. Both of those teams moved to Los Angeles recently because they were not doing super well in the other markets that they were currently playing in. They kind of had attendance issues, and they are teams that, at least the Rams, I'm not sure about the Chargers, but the Rams had already formerly played in Los Angeles. And they recently moved to Los Angeles for the hope of trying to capture more fans, trying to get more football fans to root for their team and become successful, right? Become more successful, capture more eyes, and get more fans, all that jazz. But they have been failing miserably. And the interesting thing about that is the Los Angeles Rams were in the Super Bowl last year. The LA Rams were one of the best teams in football. They had one of the most exciting head coaches. They might have the most exciting head coach in the NFL right now, who's this super young and innovative guy who's changing how football has worked. They have this incredible running back, Todd Gurley II, who's been incredible and amazing. They have this super exciting young prodigy quarterback named Jared Goff, and they have a lot of talent that they've surrounded them with on both sides of the ball. They have exciting wide receivers. They have exciting just exciting players all over the field. They have a ton of different defensive players that they've signed. They signed Dante Fowler Jr. They signed Aaron Donald. It was actually amazing how aggressive they were in free agency last year, trying to build a team that could win a Super Bowl with all these different players that they went out and signed in free agency, all these former Pro Bowlers, all these future Hall of Famers. And they were successful. They were able to build one of the best teams in the NFL. But the interesting thing is they had the lowest, it might have been the second lowest. They had one of the lowest attendances of any team in the NFL. Even though they were one of the best, and even though they played in Los Angeles, which is one of the most populous cities in the U.S., and certainly the most populous on like the 75% of the country that's outside the East Coast, they weren't able to get anybody to watch. They had the lowest attendance of anyone, even though they had one of the best teams, and they could very easily sell a ton of reasons to root for it if you were someone in LA, right? If you were someone from LA, you could root for this team for so many reasons. The team already had a connection to the city because they'd previously played in Los Angeles. They were, they could sell this as their homecoming. The team is coming back to LA. LA's having American football for the first time in however many years, a number of decades since LA had any NFL team. It was this really big and exciting thing that they could sell and pump up, and nobody came to watch the football games. And you know why? Because they don't care about football, and just because they have a football team doesn't mean they're going to start caring about football. LA already has plenty of things to do. If you're living in Los Angeles, you already have plenty of things to do, and you already have other sports teams to watch too. You have the Angels, you have the Dodgers, you have plenty of, the San Diego Chargers are another team that moved to LA, now the LA Chargers, and they have had even worse problems with attendance because they're not as good. They're a team that people from LA have said nobody's going to go out and watch a football team that's not even good when you already have so many other things to do when you live in Los Angeles, California. And it's amazing that even when they have a good team, people aren't going out to watch the games because nobody cares. People don't care about that kind of hometown pride if you're in a big city. If you're in a big city, there's no connection to a new sports team in that same sort of way. And that's something that's really interesting, but it kind of shows, large markets, they already have things to do. If you live in New York, you already have the Mets to root for. You have the Yankees. You have the Giants, the Jets, the Islanders. You have so many sports teams to root for. You can go watch a play on Broadway. You can go to Central Park. You can go to 30 Rockefeller Center. You already have plenty of things to do. You're not going to suddenly say, oh, the city's getting the New York Excelsior. They're getting an Overwatch team. That's so exciting, man. I'm so excited to go and check out this new competitive event. Nobody is saying that if you're living in New York and you don't already care about esports, which is something we're going to get to in a second. You're not going to succeed if you're trying to put a team in a city and you're trying to drop a team in a big market city for the sake of trying to get new fans exposed to the esport. The only people that are going to root for this team are people who have already been interested in esports, people who already were likely going to end up rooting for one of the teams. And that kind of moves on to the next point that, maybe the goal of putting a team in a city isn't to get new fans, because you're never going to get new people interested in an esport just because they have a team in their city. But maybe you're just hoping to get fans more passionate about a team because they are from the city. And, maybe you're thinking, we already have Overwatch fans in New York, New York, LA, these places that we're going to put Overwatch teams. There's already a lot of people there. There's a good chance there's a huge number of Overwatch fans who live in those cities, and maybe we can put an Overwatch team there, and by doing so, we're going to go and get these fans even more excited. We're going to get them even more likely to watch the Overwatch League. We're going to get them more likely to buy merchandise and to spend money on gear and jerseys and all that jazz. That's another goal that you could try and have, as we kind of stated a moment ago. But in that circumstance, that is a trade-off that is not worth it. Yes, you will get some people from New York City to like the New York City Excelsior, but the large majority of Overwatch fans, or again, go back to our Pong example, when you're placing an esports team in a city, the large majority of people don't live in that city. The large majority of people not only don't have that city, but they have no real connection to the city. And that's going to alienate people that otherwise could have been a fan of that team. So, for instance, if you want to look at me as an example, I'm from Cincinnati. I have some family that's lived out in Kansas City. I've had some family that's lived out in Oklahoma. There have been a number of different places that I've either had family or that I've traveled to and spent time at as a child. I would take vacations in Florida. As a kid, I've gone on a number of different road trips. And being in Cincinnati, I have some family that lives in the surrounding area in Indiana and Kentucky and Michigan. And so there's a number of different places that I could very easily identify with. I could pretty easily identify with, I could pretty easily identify with the Michigan Wolverines if I want to root for them in college football because I have family that lives in Ann Arbor. I could pretty easily root for the Oklahoma Sooners because I have family that lives in Norman. But I don't have any connection whatsoever to New York, to LA, and whatever loose connections I would have would not feel very genuine, right? It's not really something that would make me feel like, I'm going to root for the New York Excelsior because I like New York, because I like that idea. I think for Overwatch in particular is kind of interesting because Overwatch has really spread itself thinly where it's only in very few specific areas of the United States. And then I guess there is a little bit of an element of like maybe even if you live in Scotland, you'll maybe root for the London Spitfire or something because they're in the UK. Or maybe even if you live in Lyon, France, you'll root for the Paris team in the Overwatch League. Like maybe that's something that you'll be able to capture the entire country if you only have one team representing that country in like a global league like you're seeing with the Call of Duty League or whatever. But when it comes to these specific teams, the only reason that regionality works in traditional sports is because they're everywhere, because every major city or the majority of major cities in American football or in America have some sort of American football team, either a college team or a pro team. The fact that it's really difficult for the majority of people to identify with any team in the Overwatch League is kind of interesting. The majority of people are not going to have a connection to a big city. They might be loosely connected to a few teams, but it's interesting. It's not a trade-off that's worth it, I think, because if you were to think about the people that are already going to be rooting for an esports team, right? That's the thing that's kind of dumb about this whole situation. In League of Legends, there are plenty of reasons to root for different teams. There are plenty of connections that you can have to CLG, to TSM, to Dignitas, to all these different teams that are either in the NALCS or going to be coming back to it in Dignitas's case. But you're going to alienate people from rooting for TSM if TSM were just the New York team solo mids, right? You would alienate a lot of people and kind of limit the growth that team can have, whereas esports, that's not what you should really be doing. The only people that are going to be rooting for these teams are people that already live in the city and who already were going to be rooting for the teams in esports anyway. That's the thing that's kind of not making sense about this whole thing. I love CLG, and if CLG were the Cincinnati Counter Logic Gamers, then I would love them maybe a little bit more, but I'm going to love them anyway and still root for them. That's not something that I need to have. I don't need to have that kind of connection. And esports fans, they're already going to find ways to identify with teams. The only thing that you're doing when you place teams in specific cities and make it a regional thing is you're going to alienate people and make it harder for them to root for teams. I can feel an incredible sense of connection to CLG, but I can't get into Overwatch and try and have any connection to any Overwatch team when I have no connection to any of the cities that these teams are based out of. You're really alienating people by doing this, and it's not a trade-off that's worth it, I think. If whatever small boost in sales you'll have from fans being a little bit more passionate because they're rooting for their own city's team, I feel like that's largely going to be offset because the majority of people don't live in those cities. The majority of people don't have a connection to those cities. And the majority of people are going to be alienated and stop caring as much about whatever teams from those cities, right? You're only alienating people who don't have a team to root for with that regionality. And so ironically, I think the thing that you could do if you wanted to have a regional, or if you wanted to move into like the regionality thing, if you wanted to try and get to a point where you had regionally based esports teams, ironically, the thing to do, in my opinion, would be to move away from the, just try and move away from having the big city teams, but move to small markets, or at least have some small markets, because there is literally zero small market esports teams anywhere in any league currently. The interesting thing about small markets is that those are the cities that will actually start getting interested in new sports if they have a team that's good at them. So for instance, Cincinnati is a city that has, I think, about 1 million people that live in the greater Cincinnati area, and about 300,000 that live in the downtown or live within the city limits. But that's still a relatively small city, right? That's still a very small city in the grand scope of things. But even though it's a small city, recently there's been 2 major sports teams that have been in Cincinnati for the past 30 years or so. The Cincinnati Bengals, the NFL team, and then the Cincinnati Reds, who are the oldest team in baseball. And both of them have been pretty horrible for the past 20 years or so. They have both been pretty abysmal since the 90s. The Bengals have been more abysmal for a longer period than that, actually. But both of them have been pretty abysmal since the 1990s. 1990 was the last year the Reds won a World Series. And recently, we have seen a huge amount of people get really interested in soccer or association football in Cincinnati, because we had a very low league soccer team called FC Cincinnati that was, soccer. I don't know if I can explain it properly to Europeans, but soccer is a really unpopular thing in America. Like, Americans would rather watch what we call the big 4 sports. American football, baseball, the NBA, and hockey are all much more popular than soccer, which is partially because soccer has no real, there aren't really good teams on the world stage in soccer in the CONCACAF region in general. But, most Americans would rather watch those big 4 sports rather than soccer, which is why the MLS is not nearly as successful as all those other sports leagues. But Cincinnati cares way more about soccer than it does the, American football or baseball right now, because our other sports teams have been so bad for so long. And FC Cincinnati were really good. They were really good even if they were playing in like the 3rd tier of American soccer, which is already like pretty far down the ladder in terms of, the top regions who have like exciting soccer play. I know I'm killing Europeans fans by saying soccer so much, but, even though American soccer is already something that is so low, so like unskilled to watch, and then you're looking at the third level league in the US, which is even lower, lower tier soccer, not as exciting, not as well refined play. But Cincinnati loves it because we have a team that's not shit, right? That's something that's, and recently they got promoted up into the MLS, which is really interesting to see. If you want to get into regional, if you want to have a sports league that is breaking into a regional market, the best thing to do is try and get into cities that don't already have a ton of sports teams, because nobody's going to care about the New York Excelsior when they have the New York Knicks and the New York Nets and the New Jersey Nets and the New York Giants and the New York Jets. But if you go into Indianapolis that has like, they have the Pacers, I guess, the Indiana Pacers, and they have the Colts, who have both been not particularly amazing. If you move into small markets, if you move into Oklahoma City, if you move into Nevada, if you move into like small places that don't already have an amazing sports team, that's kind of how you would, that's the only way that you could maybe expand your reach in terms of getting people interested in the sport. Because small cities, those are the only ones that are actually going to be interested in maybe looking into a new sport, or in this case, esport, if they have some sort of regional team. Ironically, that's what you would want to do, and no place in the world is doing that currently, which is kind of funny. Or no esports league in the world is looking to move into a small market, which I would say is actually probably a pretty big mistake. But anyway, to finish this off, I want to say this is still a dumb idea, even if you're moving into a small market, because this is the least profitable part of traditional sports. When you're Okay, so to give another analogy, in American sports, there's currently a little bit of controversy going on because most American sports teams, when they build a stadium, they will get the city to pay for like half of it. So if you're building a football stadium in Los Angeles, they're going to sign some sort of deal with the city where like half of it is paid for by the city, by taxpayer dollars. And the idea behind that is that, you know, when you're building this huge arena in a city and you're taking up all this space, this arena is going to host music events. It's going to host, you know, the NFL draft. It's going to host the NBA All-Star game. It's going to host all these big sporting events or otherwise, you know, a political convention or some sort of big event. It's going to be this big space that can be used to host a number of different things that people are going to travel to. They're going to be coming to the city. They're going to be going out to restaurants, booking hotels, and in theory, boosting the city's economy. So sports owners will go and try and see if they can broker some sort of deal with the city where they say the city will pay for half, we'll pay for half, and then it'll break even like that. I'm pretty sure the evidence shows that it doesn't actually boost the city's economy in any sort of significant way, and that it's kind of just a scam that owners will use to try and not have to pay for this big multi-million-dollar stadium they're going to be having to pay for. But the interesting thing is that these stadiums are not profitable. It's not profitable to go and build a stadium. Think about it. If you're building a stadium that hosts, let's say it costs $100 million to build, and it seats however many thousands of people that are paying $80 a pop to go into every event, you have to have so many events to turn a profit on that. Most stadiums are never going to be able to recoup the cost that it costs to build. Like, you have to have so many events where you're selling out the crowd, where you're, you know, breaking even on all the costs that it. Think about the cost. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit jumbled here. Think about the cost that it has to even run an event, right? You have to hire so many people to run the concessions and to seat the audience and to, you know, do all the various things to keep the stadium doing well. You have to run so many things, and it costs a tremendous amount just to keep a stadium running. But to take the initial investment of $100 million, I think there's some Overwatch team that's building like a $50 million stadium. Think about how many times you have to sell out your audience to recoup that cost. That's the one thing about traditional sports that doesn't really make money at all is the selling the seats to fill a stadium. What most sports do to make money is they're focused on sponsorships and broadcasting deals. And they don't care nearly as much about filling seats in a stadium because that's the least profitable thing there. That's what esports should really be focused on. Esports should be focused on the broadcasting rights of who's paying or who's going to be broadcasting LCS, right? So, for instance, in LCS, the way that teams are going to be making money is if it gets a lot of viewers, and there are, you know, different spots, different organizations. In theory, you know, and in traditional sports, again, just going back to traditional sports, you're going to pay a lot of money if you're CBS and you want the exclusive rights to broadcast the Super Bowl. If you know you're going to get this ridiculous amount of people watching this event and you're going to be able to sell ad spots for millions and millions of dollars just for a single 30-second ad, you're going to be willing to put up a lot of money to get the exclusive rights to broadcast that. And that's the interesting thing about esports. That, you know, you could, in theory, the LCS being broadcasted exclusively on a specific site, they should be trying to build that up, and that's where the money should really be focused on, or that's where teams should really be focused on trying to make as much money as possible. Because the traditional method of having a stadium that people play and then go and pay to watch teams play at, that is not where the money currently lies. And it is... Esports is interesting in that they don't have to build a 100-yard football field. They don't have to build a basketball court to have people physically play in. Everything can be digital, and that's where people should really be focused. It's really interesting for me to see because I feel like it's an odd step in the wrong direction. As I said at the start of this video, you know, that's really the thing that esports can use to differentiate itself from traditional sports, because you're never going to be able to overtake traditional sports just by copying what they've been doing. And this is one place that you can really truly be different, where you can have different teams that don't have to be affiliated within specific cities, who you don't have to be alienated in rooting for Cloud9 because Cloud9 are the Miami Cloud9. Like, everybody outside of Miami, who cares about Cloud9 if they're from Miami, right? Like, it's something that you don't have to alienate a large portion of the country in rooting for a specific team. Anybody can root for FlyQuest. Anybody in North America, or outside of North America for that matter, can root for FlyQuest and feel a real deep connection with that team for any particular reason that they want. You know, any person can try and find any sort of connection with a team. It doesn't have to be pigeonholed into, I'm rooting for this team because they're from my city and I have to root for them because this is where I live. It's interesting. It's interesting to see so many sports leagues, or esports leagues rather, go in such a weird direction that feels like it's taking a major step back. Again, if we were to live in a world where everyone was a fan of esports, where esports were this super big, exciting global phenomenon that was the premier sporting thing, then that would be awesome. But we're not there right now. And it's really interesting that people seem to be jumping the gun, in my opinion, when it comes to doing all that. But anyway, that's just my opinion on all this. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. I will be back with another one discussing another esports subject in a couple of days. But until then, thank you all very much for watching. Good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.